Okay. Let me get you here. Right.
Test. Okay. No place. I'll just hold this since there's no place. All right. Probably should have worn a collared shirt today, so I'm gonna be holding this. How's everyone doing today? All right. You guys don't sound like you're doing good, man. It sounds like you're tired. All right. One person's doing good. All right. So I want to talk to you today about AI. Before I get started, I just want to introduce myself. So my name's Aamir Lakhani. Just ignore everything you know about spelling and grammar, and the name makes sense. All right. He's asked, like, Dad, like, what happened? Like, why did you name me this when my sister's name is Sarah? And he's like, don't ask questions. You were born like when Pakistan went to the World Cup. And I was like, he's like, I named you after the star player. And I was like, oh, cool. Like I love soccer. And he's like, no, not that World Cup, man. It's cricket. So I was like, great. What the heck is that? And he showed me, and I was like, they're just playing baseball wrong. I work as a researcher, basically. I mean, I do a lot of forensics, incident response. But I get to work with a lot of customers and figuring out how they've been breached, especially with malware. And I try and figure out like why systems didn't catch that. Now I always say I'm a ninja because I study Krav Maga, and I'm not very good at it, but I am in my karate stand right now. So don't try and rush me because this is how I look in my karate stand. And I'm a hacker. Actually, last time I was here at Circle Cities Con, I was single, and I'm married now, so that's pretty awesome. But you guys had nothing to do with that, so never mind. I live in Houston, and I survived this little thing called Hurricane Harvey this year. And I'll always be careful of Harvey. I mean, after Hurricane Harvey, I was like pretty upset at watching like Family Feud from now on. But the reason for that is I actually took these pictures myself from outside like my neighborhood. I had to actually like be like rescued from my house, and when Hurricane Harvey happened, I had just moved to Houston. Like I literally had moved to Houston. My family was like, "You travel all the time." Hope this doesn't break. Okay. All right. My family's like, "You travel all the time. Can't you just move to Houston since you're only there on the weekends?" And I was like, "Sure." Bought a house out there, and like 2 weeks later, Harvey happened. I was like, "Great, I made the wrong decision." I'm not gonna make the wrong decision and stuff on this again. but the one thing about Harvey is I kind of knew about the threats happening. I mean, for like 3-4 days, they kept on telling everyone, "Hey, like, be prepared for this. If you're gonna stay at your house, you may have to be stuck there without power." So obviously, I went to the grocery store, bought a whole bunch of tequila, and I had my shotgun. I am in Texas, right? So I figured I'm good. But like I said, with the pictures, as you can tell, I obviously had to be, taken out of my neighborhood. And a lot of people did. But that wasn't like the worst part. The worst part was, there's a Facebook group in our neighborhood, and people are talking, and they're talking about like different things happening, and they're like, "Hey, there's guys actually coming around the neighborhood since everyone's out, and they're breaking into people's houses." And I'm like, great, wow, I did not see that. Like this really sucks. And I started thinking about the dangers that we don't see all the time, and no matter how much warnings that we have, like we don't see dangers. And when I started thinking back about my life in cyber, I started thinking about the same thing. It's like the dangers that we don't know about, like how do we protect against those? And of course, everyone says AI, right? I'm like, great, how does that work? And that's when I started looking into like AI, especially for my research. Because the world today is full of threats, right? There's cyber threats, there's threats everywhere. And I always talk to people and I'm like, well, what do you do about threats? Like, what do you actually do for a living when you're like looking at threats? I tell them, I'm a hacker. I just like hack stuff, see how things break, and try and reverse engineer that. And is anyone here a hacker? Right? Probably all of you, right? In some ways. Now, how would you define hacker? How would someone define hacker? Can anyone give me a definition? That's right, no one knows. Okay, this didn't work. This is supposed to be a video playing. So, never mind. I guess we'll just move on, right? Oh, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Yes, that's hacking. Is there a sound out here or anything? I heard sound. All right. Excellent. Hopefully for the HDMI. Anyways, like people always are wondering what hacking is, and in my opinion, hacking is like trying to figure out what the threats are. And as a researcher, I see threats all the time, right? We're always browsing malware, looking at techniques, we're looking at darknet stuff. We see like interesting things all the time. I mean, like just looking at the darknet, like looking at threats out there, right? I mean, you can see some good stuff here, right? Anyone's partying afterwards? I mean, I don't even know what this stuff is, like Afghan Kush. Just don't look on my bag, okay? Because I have to do the research, right? But I mean, we see threats all the time. And like one of the interesting things about like some of the threats that I get to come across besides just, malware and cyber threats is, how people are using threats. I mean, for example, I actually this was really cool. I got to order counterfeit money to see how real it was. Now this was a little bit ago. That's why it's, the prices are out of whack right now. But, it actually was a good deal when I did order this. And I actually looked at a, black marker test. It passed. I actually held it up against a light $100 bill. It had the little thread going across it. I got to take it to 3 banks and 2 of them couldn't tell it was fake money, right? And it was pretty awesome. I was like, hey, can I use this now? They didn't let me, right? And then there's the kind of the BS threats that we hear about all the time. Hey, hire a hitman, sure, send your 10 grand to someone, see how lucky you get, right? But more importantly, from cyber threats, there are cyber threats out there, and we see 0 days all the time. I mean, I probably come across surprisingly, and I was really surprised about this, probably anywhere between 20 to 200 new 0 days or new variants of techniques from existing malware that's being used that no AV engine, no IPS engine, no next generation shit, whatever you have in your network actually worked, right? And they're being sold. I mean, there's actually companies out there that are offering today up to $500,000 for an iOS 11.3 remote hack or remote exploit out there. And, I always wonder, I go, well, if everything is working really awesome, right? I mean, why do we have such a hard time, catching stuff? And it's important to remember how most security companies today catch attacks, right? Now, I'm going to simplify it and just talk about AV for a second, but, it's very similar to when you talk about IPS and some other things is, they essentially look for a signature, and they want to do a pattern match somehow on that signature, right? We know hashing sucks, right? Everyone knows hashing sucks when we talk about AV. Don't worry, most companies are actually not doing hashing these days, right? They have what they call their smart signature lookup. And what they're doing is they're actually looking at, because they know most malware authors are packing their code. That means they're encrypting it, they're compressing it somehow. And what they're doing in their AV engine is a lot of times they're running APIs, like Windows APIs. And they're looking for kind of characteristics in APIs, like long sleep timers or some other characteristics, or you're deleting shadow files. And they try and they try and basically look at code to see if we can solve a problem. Can we find some behavior that's malicious? Now that doesn't work, right? I mean, if it worked, we'd have solved our malware issue, right? You wouldn't hear about a ransomware every single day, right? So what's the answer? And of course, we're saying today, the answer is this actually plays? I love it. We say today the answer is machine versus machine, right? Let our machines fight for us. I love Terminator 2. This is one of my favorite movies, right? Anyone seen Terminator 2? Raise your hand. Alright, spoiler alert, at the end of this movie, everyone dies. Okay, I hate to ruin it for you. But everyone dies because fighting machines are not really effective. But that's what every vendor is doing these days, right? They're basically telling you that, hey, let's go ahead and let's put the new technology out there. Now I remember going to security conferences a few years ago, and everyone was talking about hey, threat intelligence. Every company went on and said, today is threat intelligence. We have the best threat intelligence product. And then a few years before that, it was hey, it's not about defense, it's all about detection. We have the best detection products. And this year, it seems like the best buzzword, right, is whatever you want to call it. Whether it's deep analysis, machine learning, holistic ecosystem, whatever the hell you want to call it. Every company out there, in fact, every company that I kind of come across these days has some sort of advanced machine learning AI protection to protect you against the latest threats that are out there. And why wouldn't they, right? Because if they don't have those latest protections, they're actually losing money. Marketing has done a great job for these companies because, they're exploiting the fear people are having, and they're exploiting how hard it is to like protect against the malware these days. We're failing all the time because none of these companies actually are preventing most of the attacks that are going on today. Now, let me show you how we fail, right? Anyone use VirusTotal before? Alright, so what VirusTotal is basically a website that has, about 60 to 70 different antivirus manufacturers on it, and you can upload a file, and you can see if it's infected or not, and it'll be scanned by 60 to 70 manufacturers out there. Now, what I did here is I took the most basic backdoor you can create, right? I just took Metasploit, right? I downloaded Adobe Reader, I took a Metasploit on it, and I basically put a reverse shell on that. I actually named the reverse shell myevilprogram.exe, hopefully, to, see how many people caught it. And like I said, this is script kiddie type stuff. I would expect everyone to catch it. And don't worry, a lot of people did catch this, right? I did do a little command here, basically kind of try to, mangle the file just a little bit, nothing too special here, just a couple of times. So it would have a new hash. It wouldn't, I just wouldn't get a hash detection on it. And then I started uploading that file to VirusTotal. And like I said, I was expecting 100% of the manufacturers to catch this. And surprisingly, a lot of them did, but a lot of good, well-known manufacturers didn't catch that. Now, I don't want to call out any manufacturer because, you know what, I did this over and over again. I got different results every single time, and some of the biggest guys, right, weren't catching this, and some of the biggest guys were just on different tests every time because I'm generating a new hash every time, a new file every time. So you can see there's quite a few that are catching it, and you'll see it goes up to I think 40 or 50 actually eventually catch it out of 70. But when you scroll down, you'll see in a second, there's kind of the big names that we use out there actually don't catch it, at least on this particular version. And it just changes every time that I did that. And most of these companies that weren't catching it, okay, that's the company I work for. My sales guy made me put that in. I apologize. You can shoot me afterwards. But most of the companies that didn't catch it, I actually did start looking at some of their protection, and they were advertising, hey, we do machine learning, we do AI, protect against the latest ransomware threat. I was like, great. Forget it. If you can't protect against the most basic attack, how can I trust you against the most complicated attacks? And so I started thinking in my mind, well, why does this happen, right? What are companies doing? And I already told you, for the most part, a lot of them are doing, static signatures. Now, I told you static signatures suck, and no one does that because it's very easy, just like I showed you, how to change a hash. We all know that, right? But guess what? Every company actually still does static signatures. And I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Everyone says they don't do static signatures. But they call it cloud lookup service or some other intelligence quick lookup service. And the reason for that, this is very, very easy to do. It's very cost effective. That means it's very fast from a processor standpoint. And you can basically check hundreds of millions of files in a matter of fractions of a second. So it's very easy for companies to just check this as a quick check. Hey, do we know about this file or this hash before? The next thing what they'll do is, like I said, is they'll kind of use code emulation. And most AV companies, most IPS companies will do this, is they'll actually have Windows APIs running. And they're running a subset of these APIs. And they're actually running them to see if there's any type of known malicious behaviors occurring. Hey, what are these APIs doing? How would Windows kind of react in a very, very light way? And then we have companies that basically have their smart signatures, their behavioral signatures. And when I started looking at this sounded really cool at first because this was what everyone was talking about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And when I really started looking at the top vendors that are doing this, what I started discovering is behavioral just means a decision tree, right? It's basically static signatures, but it's more, I guess, more complicated because it's just exactly think of a decision tree. Hey, if you see element A, look for B, C, and D. Right? If you see element Z, look for 1, 2, and 3. If you see any of these paths, right, then that behavior is malicious, right? A great behavioral signature that I saw was, hey, if we detect Metasploit, right, port 4444, we don't even know what it is, don't check it, just call it malicious. Right? Companies are doing that. That's what they call behavioral signatures. Now I'm telling you the bad way they're doing it, right? Obviously there are some smart guys out there with smart signature writing and they're doing a little more intense stuff, but this is really what happens for the most part. And then, of course, everyone said, well, that doesn't work, so let's go with sandboxing solutions, right? Let's go ahead and put our sandbox out there, virtual execution. And that died, right? All the malware authors figured out, hey, you know what? I can just outlive your sandbox, right? If you're going to execute code on a sandbox, all I need to do is wait you out, because how many resources are you going to run? How many virtual test Windows XP boxes are you going to run? How many browsers are you going to run? I'm just going to outwait you, and once I'm done, then I'm going to explode my malware. So today, what do we do? Today, we're like, okay, let's do this cool machine learning thing, right? Awesome, right? But what's behind that? That's kind of what I was trying to figure out, because everyone says they're doing machine learning, but not everyone does machine learning, and everyone that does it does it actually a little bit differently, because all machines, obviously, as we know, are not equal. So just spoiler alert, everyone died at the end of this segment. Right. I want to actually show you exactly how machine learning works in a very, very simple example, right? We're going to all be machines. We're going to pretend we're machines, and I'm going to give you a problem to solve. I want you to think of an animal, any animal in your head, right? Think of animal. Everyone thinking of giraffe right now? Good. Now, let's say I give you some characteristics, some guidelines. I say that animal has to be a mammal. Good. Giraffe, right? I'm still thinking of that. And I say that animal has to have 4 legs. I have to think about this for a second, but I think the giraffe does have 4 legs, right? So that's good. And I say that animal now has to have gray fur. Crap, this has to be one messed up looking giraffe at this point. And I say now that animal has to have 10 pounds. It has to be around 10 pounds. And I say it has to have a short tail. What kind of animal is this? Cat? What else could it be? Dog? What else? Squirrel? Alright. Now maybe not a squirrel. No, let me give it one more characteristic. Let's say I now say it has to have long ears. Now what kind of animal does this have to be? A rabbit. Good. You just did machine learning, actually. This, using a couple of different techniques, right? Called, deduction. And there's a couple other techniques as well. Now, machine learning isn't anything new. It's actually been around for a long time. Now, does anyone know who this guy is? Turing. That's right. That means you can read. That's awesome. You guys did an awesome job. Alright. It's definitely not my dad. No family resemblance. So Alin Turing was kind of the first guy that, at least is credited for, coming up with like neural networks and some sort of machine learning. And he came up with a couple of different like theories on machine learning. And since then, we've actually been moving quite a bit forward on machine learning, right? I still remember when IBM Watson was started to beat everyone on Jeopardy. I was like, wow, Alex Trebek must be a cyborg. He doesn't age, man. Right? And of course, Elon Musk today is like saying like, hey, machine learning and robots and AI is going to kill us all, right? There's some really interesting things. And of course, let's not forget about the famous Skynet attack, right? Moment of peace for them. So there's different types of machine learning. Machine learning isn't magical, right? There's 2 major types of machine learning today called supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Now, supervised learning is what most manufacturers work on today. A lot of them do unsupervised learning. They'll actually do a combination of both. But supervised learning is essentially I know the sets. I know if something is good or bad. I know what the end result needs to be. And I'll show you how we work on this on malware, right? But basically, I'm feeding the computer. I'm saying hey, this file is good. These 100 files are good. These 1,000 files are good. They're clean files, right? So at the end of the day, when I give you an unknown file, look for the characteristics that I gave you in clean files and see if they compare. It's essentially a compare tool, right? But we also try and make it try and get a decision based on what it knows, right? Now let's take something simple. Let's try and like guess the price of a car, right? Say we know the price, we have 3 models here, right? Yes, my Model 3 is still delayed. Crap. But say we have the price of 3 cars, and we know the base price of, 2 of the cars is $35,000 and $165,000, and we're trying to get the price of the 3rd car. Like, how will we do that, right? Well, we have to have some information. We have to have some sales data, and then once we have the sales data of like all 3 cars, right? If we're trying to figure out an average price, what we can do is we can kind of, figure out the average, where the average lines intersect. And you can tell I'm not in marketing because my PowerPoints and animations really suck, right? Once we have like the averages, we can actually like measure the sum of those averages and the differences of those averages and figure out what those error rates are going to be, right? So when I come up with a number, right, when I'm doing averages, I'll come up with what those error rates of those averages will be, which will kind of give me an idea of where my computer needs to like look for as a sum error. Now I'll explain a little bit more about what this means when I get to malware. I'm skipping that pretty fast. Let's say I have 100 files here, right? And I analyze like 100 files and I have 20 files that I know that are malicious. So I already know these files are malicious. And I look at why they're malicious and I figure out, well, they all have like, long sleep timers. They're all starting up, on boot up. They all have a startup registry that doesn't look normal. So all my 20 files that are malicious, they all have these registry keys. I'm like, great, I got something that I know is malicious, right? But then I start looking at, do any of my clean files have that same registry key? And when I do, if I discover like 5 files have that same registry key, I go, hey, there's a percentage of like error that I'm going to have here that I have to take into account, right? So what is that percentage, right? What is the percentage of registry startup keys that will be malicious? So if I take 100 files, what percentage do I expect to have malicious if I look at, registry keys, these specific registry keys? And in this case, it'll be 80%. 80% of my files are malicious. And then I may start looking at more characteristics in these malicious files. I may say, not only do they have long sleep timers, right, or startup registries, some of them have AT commands, some of them delete shadow files. Like say 90% of the malicious files delete shadow files. But well, that's pretty heavy. That's pretty important, right? I should like take a note of this, right? Because that's a process that I want to know about. That's a characteristic or a feature that I want to know about. And I'll start looking at all these characteristics on malicious files and clean files. And I start coming up with a decision tree. And I say like if I have, and some of the lines you can't see, but if I have like, a combination of some of these tasks, right? At that point, I'm going to actually rate that file malicious or clean, if I have a combination of some of these or a lack of combination of some of these. That's a little bit of how decision trees are made. Now, surprisingly, there's a lot more characteristics of clean files because there's more clean files in the world. So essentially what we do is we start building a neural network. Now that sounds like a fancy term, but it's not really that fancy. What a neural network essentially is it's essentially taking nodes, and a node is just processing something. It's just processing a characteristic. And in my case, right, I have an input layer of files that I'm putting in, right? I have an output layer, which is basically a decision, and I have 2 hidden layers. I have a clean layer of clean characteristics and a hidden layer, 2 of bad characteristics. I'm going to take files that I already know about because I'm in the learning stage of machine learning. I'm going to figure out like all the characteristics I can of clean files and all the characteristics I can of hidden files and start basically categorizing them and looking for them as well. And then I'm going to kind of take a combination of those, right? And kind of figure out, like, hey, what really matters? Like, if I take a file and I have a whole bunch of clean characteristics, and I take another file and I have a whole bunch of, like, malicious characteristics, what does it really mean? And how many characteristics do I need to really, like, look at to figure out what's clean and what's malicious? So what I have to do is I actually have to come up with a weight. I have to figure out all the characteristics that are in clean files and malicious files, and then I have to weight them. And this isn't magical. I actually have to decide. I have to come up with my own weight. I have to say hey, deleting your hard drive is something really bad, and I'm going to give it a really high weight, right? And a startup, automatic startup, well, that's bad, but you know what? Maybe I'm not going to give it such a high weight. I may give one thing 100%. I may give another thing 50%, right? I have to come up with that. This is a lot of times where machine learning is failing sometimes, is because if you don't understand weights, you don't understand malware, you don't understand how to process that, you're not going to be able to make a decision, right? And this is really kind of the standard formula of machine learning, is like, hey, let me take those weights and let me process that. Now, in my test environment, when I was actually able to, at one point, get almost 4 billion characteristics of clean files. I looked at about 2 petabytes of data, right, of malware of files. And actually what I was doing was I was actually using things like VirusTotal, where people were bringing in files, and I was like, looking at clean files that no one detected as malicious, which means I already have a bias, right? I'm hoping that a malicious file will actually be detected as malicious by someone, right? But if I have 100% clean across 70 vendors, then I'm going to look at those characteristics. And then when I find bad characteristics, I'm going to take those characteristics. And I had about 2 billion, bad characteristics from malicious characteristics. And at that point, I'm like, oh, great, that's awesome. I have a lot of characteristics. I can beat everyone, right? Until I started figuring out later on down the road, the numbers really are not that great. They sound impressive. A lot of companies will tell you we look for 10 billion characteristics. But if you found a characteristic that's only used one time in one malicious file, how important is that? Probably not. You're just wasting processor cycles, and you're not really being that efficient either. So don't let the numbers game fool you, but that's how it works. So in a typical environment, what we would do is we'd have an input file. We would have it basically go against our features, right? And some of the features that I'm taking is, they go down to even power consumption. Like, how does malware react on a specific Dell box, and how does the power actually jump up or spike? Besides long sleep timers. So I'm taking hardware characteristics as well as software-based characteristics. And that's how I got such a high number of characteristics, right? Obviously, I still have a bias based on that, but then I have to kind of think about how am I going to weight those characteristics. And then after a while, I had to have the machine come up with those weights automatically based on other characteristics that I inputted, because I'm not going to start inputting billions and billions of weights in there either, right? So I had to come up with, some sort of formula to make that happen, as well as, give it, clean characteristics. Now, essentially, all my clean characteristics, I gave it a negative weight. All my malicious characteristics, I gave it a positive weight, and I came up with a number. I said, okay, if I'm above a certain number, right, this is what if I'm above 90%, then maybe I'm gonna mark this as malicious. Now, I started talking to some analysts, across a lot of different companies, big companies and small companies, and the number I came up with my weights was above 90%, right? Most of them had it a lot higher. At least they were telling me that they were close to 99%. We'll see, Now, in real life, like I said, it's not just one, right? It's multiple inputs, right? Like I said, you're dealing with billions of inputs, or billions of characteristics. And each characteristic, remember that decision tree that I had, right, may spawn a new decision tree. So one characteristic of a long startup, a long sleep timer, right, may actually spawn to a lot of other, hidden malicious characteristics. And that may spawn to some clean characteristics that I need to look for as well, because, clean files could have some malicious behaviors as well. And based on computing all this, that's when I get a result. So how did I do this, right? I mean, like I said, basically I started off with this empty set, and I started looking at files every day. I was downloading pretty much the APIs from a lot of different places like Darknet, VirusTotal, VirusBay, kind of every place I wanted. And this was only for education purposes. This wasn't going into a product or anything. This was only for me learning it, what these characteristics are. And I had to reverse engineer these files. I actually had to run them. I had to run them on machines. I had to look at what they were doing. I actually had to learn a lot about how malware works. And I started taking these characteristics and measuring exactly what these characteristics were and putting them into this AI system. Right? And once I had the training set, figured out, at that point, that's when I said, okay, let me go ahead and see what works and what doesn't work. And at the end of the day, what I ended up doing, just go through that, is what I ended up doing was to actually see if my system worked, is I actually took all the clean files that I started getting on VirusTotal. That means that no one actually detected these files as malicious. And I was starting to run them through my system to see how many malicious files that I came up with. And I was coming like, probably out of taking like 10,000 files every day, I was coming up with 200 files that my system said were malicious, that no one else said that were malicious. I was like, cool, did I just discover 0 days? Like, who knows, right? That sounds pretty cool. Out of those 200 files, like daily, I would say probably about 50 of those files were truly malicious. So they were, I wouldn't say they're 0 days, but they were like, either some sort of variant, or they had, some sort of new technique that was being used, or they just weren't being detected by the existing anti-malware software that was out there. So I was like, cool, that kind of works, right? That was my foray into AI. And I was like, so we solved like all the problems, right? I mean, everything's solved now in life. And not exactly, because then I ran into this problem of like new malware. And what did I do with new malware? And when new malware came out, I was like, great, I'm going to take the characteristics I see in this new malware, I'm going to put it in my system. I'm going to start like, I'm going to start like taking the characteristics and weighing that. And what I quickly found out is my entire system broke, right? And the reason it broke was because like these weights weren't like, together. Like I was taking one sample and all of a sudden I see something that's really bad, right? I see like something like WannaCry. It's making headlines all over the world, right? I go, man, this crap is bad. Let me mark this as really bad, put it in my system, and all of a sudden my system breaks with all my other files in there as well. So this is like a problem that we run into, right? We can't really, take one sample. We can't take one process or one test because we're going to skew all the numbers. It has to be an ongoing process. So so this was really interesting to me because I talk to a lot of vendors and they tell me like, hey, we do machine learning. We do no signatures. I go, great. Like, how do you actually train your systems? Like, if you don't have any signatures and you're not looking at malware. And they look at me, they're like, dude, we do machine learning and we don't do signatures. I was like, yeah, it's not magic, man. Like, how do you actually make it work? And then they're like, okay, next person, please. So I think that's why, like, some of the major machine learning vendors that you even hear about that don't do any signatures, they're on virus total because they're getting samples. You always have to have that learning process, right? So where do we go from here, right? I mean, we're all good, right? Everything's all good. No, we're actually not all good, and spoiler alert, she dies at the end. I promise you, at the end of the movie, at the very end of the timeline, everyone dies. Alright, this thing hates me or something. So, actually, like, and I apologize, guys. I know I'm speaking a lot faster than I normally speak as well. I just had a little text emergency at home, so, I'm, trying to get out of here. But, when I came to this conclusion, I was like, this thing really sucks because every day I hear about new malware. Every single day, right? Like malware, NotPetya, whatever this thing is tomorrow, like, hidden tiger, hidden bear, bear mask. I'm not naming porno movies or anything like that, right? There's like crazy malware that's coming out every day. And when you actually look at the malware, when you actually reverse engineer this malware, it's not that exciting, right? Even WannaCry wasn't that exciting as malware. It was doing things that we hadn't really seen before. Now, yes, it had some really cool things about SMB that we didn't know about, right? Who would have ever known? You have to patch your boxes not to get it like, infected. But things happen, right? But if these things were happening, and we already expect, like as an engineer, right, as someone that works for a security company, I know there's going to be a lot of people that don't patch, right? They're going to be hit by malware. But if AI is so good, why is AI not solving that problem? Like when WannaCry hit, why was every single manufacturer, right, not able to protect against that, right? And I don't care who you are, like what kind of artificial intelligence you do, no one like was protecting against that. Everyone waited for a signature. Yeah, some people got it in like 10 minutes, some people got it in 30 minutes, but everyone was waiting for a signature. So, how do you overcome like all this? Right? That's the thing that I think we're still trying to figure out. There's no magic in AI. There's no, it's still machine learning. You still have to go through that process of learning. So, there's my contact info. Like I said, I'm out there. The system that I talked about specifically, like I said, I'm doing a lot of research, that's with my company, outside my company as well. I actually want to release a learning system, that I was hoping to already have released by now. That's an open source learning system that you can input your own files or URLs and start looking at like some of the processing of, what's happening with AI, and, so you can learn about that. But, hopefully that'll be out in the next month or so. It'll be open source. It'll be on Git, but it'll be like basically a system that you can kind of throw all this stuff into. I will be here for a few minutes if anyone needs me, but like I said, I apologize for going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was hoping to tell